It started with a tension you could feel through the screen. The kind of silence that isn't empty but loud, that holds its breath. The set of The View was dressed like any other to vibrant colors. Polished wood, laughter just off camera, but that morning, something was off. Whoopi Goldberg had her signature reading glasses perched low on her nose, her gaze sharpened unmoving. Across from her sat Meghan Markle, Duchess of Sussex, draped in an elegant navy dress. Her smile was poised, but trembling at the edges. She was here to talk about her upcoming docuseries. That was the plan. It was supposed to be a safe space, a smart PR move. But no one in the room expected what was about to unfold. Not even the producers. Because what began as a carefully curated conversation quickly spiraled into something raw, something public, something unforgettable. A moment that would ignite headlines, divide audiences, and leave Meghan Markle visibly shaken. On live television, it all began with a question, seemingly harmless. Something about truth and ownership of narrative. Whoopi leaned forward, her voice calm, but laced with something else. An edge. So Meghan, she said, when you talk about wanting to control your story, what does that really mean? You've had documentaries, interviews, podcasts. What story hasn't been told yet? The studio audience chuckled politely, but Meghan's eyes flickered, a flicker only visible to someone who'd been in enough interviews to recognize discomfort masquerading as charm. She responded with the kind of practiced grace she'd perfected over the years. Well, I think we all deserve to be seen for who we are beyond the headlines, beyond the assumptions. Telling our story is how we reclaim our voice. Whoopi nodded slowly, but she didn't look away, and that's when you knew. This wasn't going to be just another morning show segment. The tension between them had history. Unspoken. Unresolved. Whoopi had made comments before offhand, indirect critiques on how Meghan handled her exit from the royal family, how she'd portrayed herself in interviews. But today, she wasn't being subtle. She was confronting the narrative head-on. You know, Whoopi said, sitting back in her chair, I've seen a lot of women fight for space in this world. I've done it myself. But I've also seen folks use that fight to avoid accountability. A pause. The air thinned. Do you feel, she continued, that sometimes you're not just telling your truth, but rewriting it? That's when it happened. The shift. Meghan's composure cracked just slightly. Not enough for most viewers to notice, but enough that every producer backstage leaned forward in their chair. Her lips parted. She blinked. Slow and deliberate. I think the truth evolves, Meghan said softly. It deepens as you heal. Whoopi didn't flinch. Healing is good, she said, but healing without honesty is just performance. You could hear a pin drop. Even Joy Behar looked stunned. The moment should have ended there, but it didn't. Because Meghan leaned forward, and this time, she wasn't the Duchess. She was the woman beneath the titles. I've lived through being silenced, she said, her voice quiet but steady. By a palace. By the press. By the public. And I won't apologize for wanting to speak now. There it was. Raw. Unfiltered. But Whoopi wasn't moved. I'm not asking for an apology, she said. I'm asking for reflection. The words hit like thunder in a quiet field. And that was when Meghan's eyes began to shine. Just slightly. A hint of glass. And the camera stayed on her. Longer than it should have. The director didn't cut away, because everyone watching knew something real was happening. Something that couldn't be unsaid. Behind the scenes, the control room was in chaos. A flurry of whispers, blinking lights, camera angles. Do we go to commercial? No, hold it. This is gold. No one wanted to interrupt, because it was no longer just an interview. It was a reckoning. Act 2. Conflict continued. When the show returned from break, the mood had shifted. The air was heavier, and Whoopi, she didn't soften, she doubled down. So Meghan, she said, tapping her note card with a single finger. In your interview with Oprah, you said people were concerned about your son's skin color, but you didn't name who. Why protect them if you're all about truth? Meghan looked down. A beat. Then she exhaled. I wasn't protecting them, she said. I was protecting myself. Because naming names in a palace like that, it's not just gossip. It's danger. Whoopi raised an eyebrow. But you still painted the picture, didn't you? I painted my truth, Meghan said. And I carried the cost. It was in that moment that something shifted in the studio. Not just tension, but pain. You could hear it in her voice. Years of scrutiny, of being called a liar, a manipulator, a social climber, a fraud, and sitting across from her was Whoopi Goldberg, an icon of strength, resilience, and blunt truth. But that day, she wasn't applauding Meghan's story. She was challenging it. Hard. Double quotes. You know, Whoopi said slowly, a lot of women of color watched you walk into the royal family and thought, finally, someone like us in that space. She paused. And then we watched it fall apart. Another pause. And now, we're still left wondering what was real, and what was just, curated. Meghan's voice broke, just slightly. Tears shimmered, but didn't fall. I didn't curate the pain, she whispered. That part was real. And then came the silence, heavy, wounded, not between two celebrities, but between two women, who had lived very different versions of the same struggle. Meghan looked down for a long time, and in that pause, the world saw something unexpected. Not the Duchess of Sussex, not the activist, not the polished celebrity, just Meghan, a woman trying not to cry on live television. Her hands were folded tightly in her lap. A single breath shook in her chest. The audience sat frozen. Whoopi didn't speak either. For a split second, you could almost believe she regretted the last question. But then Meghan raised her eyes, and what she said next changed everything. You know what hurts the most? She said softly. It's not the headlines. Not even the betrayal. She glanced across the table. It's being told that your pain is inconvenient. That your truth is inconvenient. She paused, then added, quieter still, that you are inconvenient. That's when Sunny Hostin, quiet until now, finally broke her silence. She leaned forward, eyes wide with concern. Meghan, she said, I don't think anyone's saying your truth doesn't matter. But Meghan turned her head slowly, her voice still trembling, but firm. No, Sunny, I know, I do. But sometimes the people you expect to stand beside you are the ones who ask you to be quieter, softer, less disruptive. And then, all eyes went to Whoopi, because everyone knew who she meant. The silence that followed was long and painful. Whoopi cleared her throat, and for a second, her voice softened. Look, she said, I've been in this game a long time. I've seen how the world treats women like us. She motioned with her hand, vaguely encompassing their shared identity: black, female, public. I know what the media does. I've felt it. But here's the thing, she continued. We don't get to just own truth without owning the contradictions too. Meghan stared at her. So did the entire studio. I'm not saying you didn't suffer, Whoopi added. I'm saying suffering doesn't excuse the choices after it. That line, it landed like a thunderclap. Bat. Meghan blinked. Slow, deliberate, as if trying to process what she just heard. Then she leaned forward again. No more royal posture. No more media-trained calm. This time, she spoke from somewhere deeper. You talk about contradictions, she said, but I was punished for mine. She motioned toward the audience, toward the cameras. The world beyond them. When I smiled, they called me fake. When I cried, they said I was manipulating. When I stayed silent, they accused me of hiding. And when I spoke up, they told me to shut up. She shook her head. There was no version of me they'd accept. You could feel the electricity shift again. The air buzzed with tension. Something real. Something raw. But Whoopi, she still wasn't ready to let go. That's fair, she said. But here's the question: do you believe you've ever hurt people too? Maybe unintentionally. Maybe through the way you've framed your story. And this time, it was Meghan who didn't flinch. Yes, she said. I know I've hurt people. Another pause. I know I've disappointed them. But I was bleeding too. And no one asked why. That's when it started. The tears. Real ones. Not performed. Not camera-ready. Her voice cracked. Not in some rehearsed crescendo, but in the quiet way a dam breaks. I've tried to be everything everyone wanted, she whispered, and in the end, I lost myself. A long silence. And then finally, Whoopi looked down, for the first time all morning. And when she looked up again, something in her had shifted. The climax begins here. A moment that would burn across headlines, across time, across breakfast tables around the world. Because what happened next, was unscripted. And no one, not the producers, not the audience, not even Meghan, saw it coming. Whoopi sighed. A long, slow breath. And she spoke. I judged you, she said. Meghan looked up. I did, Whoopi continued. Because I've lived through so many women like us, being dismissed, ignored, flattened. And when you came forward, when you shared your story, I was afraid. She paused. Afraid they'd say, see, even she's too much. The studio went quiet again. You could feel it in your chest. A reckoning between two powerful women. Two icons, two survivors. I didn't want to believe your pain, Whoopi admitted. Because if it was true, then the world's still as dangerous as I remember. Her voice caught. Meghan stared at her. I'd no script for this. No talking points, just two women, sitting across from each other, in the middle of a wound. Meghan wiped her cheek, eyes brimming. I never wanted to be anyone's symbol, she said. I just wanted to survive. And Whoopi, she nodded, for the first time that morning. Slow, heavy, real, maybe, she said quietly. We both forgot that survival looks different for everyone. The moment was devastating. Beautiful. Human. The audience didn't clap. They couldn't know. One wanted to break it, because in a world that devours vulnerability, they had just witnessed something holy. Two black women. Two icons. Two histories. Clashing, bleeding, healing on live television. And the cameras didn't look away. They couldn't. Joy Behar leaned forward, her voice barely a whisper. I think we need a break. But Whoopi held up her hand. No, she said. Let it breathe. And for a moment, the world did. When the cameras stopped rolling for commercial break, nobody moved. Not the hosts, not Meghan, not the audience. It was as if the studio itself was holding its breath. The usual hustle during breaks, the makeup touch-ups, the whispers in the earpieces, the small talk, none of that happened. Instead, silence blanketed the stage. Meghan sat in her chair, her back straight now, but her hands still clenched in her lap. Whoopi sat across from her, quiet, staring. There were no cue cards that could explain what had just happened. No rehearsed segment, no teleprompter direction, only truth. And for the first time all morning, it was mutual. When they returned from the break, the tone had completely changed. The crowd didn't cheer. The hosts didn't joke. Even the lights somehow felt dimmer. And when Whoopi spoke, it wasn't as a moderator or a performer. It was just ... Whoopi. There are moments, she said softly, where television stops being entertainment. She turned to Meghan. This is one of those moments. Meghan nodded. Slowly. Tears still clung to her lashes. Her voice was quiet but steady again. I didn't come here to fight, she said. I came here because I believed you'd understand. Whoopi's shoulders dropped. I didn't come here to fight either, she replied. I just, didn't want to be lied to. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. A truce. Not of agreement, but of understanding. Sarah, N, leaned in gently. Can I ask something? Both women turned toward her. Sarah's voice was careful, respectful. What does healing really look like, for both of you? Whoopi exhaled, deeply. Healing, she said, is learning to hear someone else's pain, without making it about your own. She glanced at Meghan, and realizing that you don't have to agree with someone's choices to respect their scars. Then Meghan spoke. Healing, she said, is when you stop needing everyone to believe you because you finally believe yourself. The words hung in the air. Soft, taut, powerful, undeniable. It was Sunny who finally addressed the audience. I think a lot of people at home are watching this and seeing themselves, she said. Their mothers, their daughters, their friends. She looked directly into the camera. Because what we just saw, that wasn't royalty in television. That was real life, and it was. Two women with different paths, different choices, but the same exhaustion, the same expectations, the same impossible weight. The weight of always having to prove you're strong, but never being allowed to be soft. Then came the question that changed the direction of the entire show. A question from the audience. A woman with tear-streaked cheeks, trembling voice. She stood up slowly and asked, do you forgive each other? The room went silent again. Whoopi looked at Meghan. Meghan looked back. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Then Whoopi said, I don't think this was ever about forgiveness. Meghan nodded. I think it was about being seen. Another long pause. But, yes, Meghan added, voice cracking slightly. I do forgive you. Whoopi blinked hard. And for the first time that morning, her voice trembled. I forgive you too. And just like that, the ice between them shattered. The audience finally exhaled. People wiped their eyes. Some applauded, slowly, gently. It wasn't the roar of a performance. It was the applause of relief, of empathy, of something broken, finding its shape again. Then Meghan reached across the table. Her hand, open. Waiting. And Whoopi reached back. Their hands touched too. Lifelines crossing. Not as host and guest, not as adversaries, but as women. Two very public, very bruised women. And it was that image, that moment, that would go viral around the world. Within hours, it was everywhere. Screenshots, memes, articles titled, "The Moment Meghan Broke and Whoopi's Redemption on Live TV." But for those who watched it live, it wasn't a headline, it was a lesson. A window into what happens when we finally stop performing and start listening. Back on set, Joy Behar finally broke the emotional silence with a shaky smile. "Well," she said, "that was supposed to be a 10-minute segment." Laughter gentle and real ripples through the room. Even Meghan smiled, so did Whoopi, because they knew something had just happened that would outlive the cameras. Something that mattered. The show wrapped 10 minutes late. The credits rolled slower than usual. The audience lingered, reluctant to leave, as if they were trying to hold on to something fragile, something human. Even the stage crew was quieter, because they all knew. They hadn't just filmed another segment. They had witnessed something real, something that cut through the polish of daytime television, and revealed to women, raw and unfinished, daring to show their pain where the world could see and feel it. After the cameras turned off, Meghan stayed in her seat. Her palms rested gently on the table, as if grounding herself in the moment. She didn't speak at first, neither did Whoopi, but they didn't need to. Some things don't need words. Finally, Whoopi stood up and walked around the table. No cameras, no audience, just two women in the aftermath of emotional warfare. She reached out and hugged Meghan. A long, quiet embrace. And in that hug was everything that hadn't been said. Grief, regret, admiration, forgiveness. Not just for each other, but for themselves. Later that day, a statement was released by ABC. It didn't mention the tears, or the clash, or the reckoning. It simply said, "On today's episode of The View, a conversation unfolded that reminded us why we do this, to open space for truth, growth, and grace." But outside the studio, the world had already taken notice. Clips of the segment flooded social media. On TikTok, people stitched together reactions, some in tears, some stunned. On Twitter, hashtags like #Meghan and Whoopi and #Let Black Women Heal trended for 48 hours. The public wasn't just consuming the moment, they were living in it. And the response, it was deeply divided. Some called Whoopi harsh, cold, unfair. Others said she was necessary, asking the questions no one else dared. Some defended Meghan fiercely, saying she had been ambushed. Others felt she had finally been held accountable. But, for the first time in a long time, people weren't just arguing about gossip. They were talking about truth, pain, public identity, private survival, and how hard it is to be a woman, especially a woman of color under the microscope of the world. In the days that followed, Meghan stayed mostly quiet. No new interviews, no Instagram posts. But she was seen out walking with Archie, smiling, softly, unbothered, because something had shifted. For her, and for us, she didn't need to explain anymore, because she had already spoken. And this time, she had been heard. As for Whoopi, she opened the next episode of The View. Alone at the table, the studio was quiet. Her glasses rested on her notepad. And when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of reflection. "I've done a lot of shows," she said. "More than I can count." She looked into the camera. "But what happened yesterday reminded me that we're not just here to talk. We're here to grow. All of us." She paused. "I was hard on Meghan. Maybe too hard, a beat. But I was honest, and she was honest back." Another pause. And in that honesty, something beautiful happened. The audience applauded gently. Not for drama, but for depth. It wasn't long before think pieces began circulating. Articles with headlines like, "The View grows up. What the Meghan Whoopi moment taught us about public healing to women. One table, and the truth we're all avoiding. When black women disagree, why it hurts, why it heals." But the most shared clip. It wasn't the tears, it wasn't the argument. It was the quiet, trembling moment when Meghan whispered, "I just wanted to survive," because it echoed in hearts that had felt the same. And it stayed with people. Not just that day, but long after. In a podcast weeks later, Meghan finally addressed the appearance. She didn't dwell on the drama. She didn't throw shade. Instead, she said something simple. "I was scared walking into that studio," she admitted. "I knew what people thought of me. I knew how quickly it could all turn." A soft breath. "But what I didn't expect was how healing confrontation can be." She paused. "And how sometimes, the people who challenge us the most are the ones who see us the clearest." Then, almost as an afterthought, She added, "I'll always be grateful to Whoopi for that." That's how the story ended. Not with a scandal, not with sides, but with two women flawed, fierce, and fully human, finding a fragile understanding in a space not built for softness. It wasn't clean, it wasn't easy, but it was real. And that made all the difference. Because at the end of the day, this wasn't about a TV show. It wasn't about royalty. It wasn't even about Meghan or Whoopi. It was about all of us. The versions of ourselves we hide, the truths we carry quietly, the survival stories we're still writing, and the hope that one day, when we speak, someone might finally listen.